Completing the square is a skill we use to take a quadratic expression and turn it into a perfect square. So we need this in conic sections for all types because that general form of equation deals with having a perfect square for x and a perfect square for y. So the process to do this is a quick and simple one. All we need to do, essentially, we are trying to figure out if we have x squared plus 8x plus blank. We're trying to figure out what we need to add to that to turn it into a perfect square. To do so, all we need to do is take the number with x, essentially what will end up being the middle number, divide it by 2, or divide it in half, so we have 8 divided by 2. That equals 4, and then just square that number, and that tells us what we need to add to turn it into a perfect square. So x squared plus 8x plus 16 is a perfect square trinomial, and then our whole end goal is to write it as these parentheses with the square on the outside. So it always starts out with whatever variable we were dealing with. The sign, the plus or minus, is whatever sign was before the x term. So in this case, it would be a plus. And the other number in the parenthesis, so whatever that middle number was. So after you divided by 2 before you squared it. So this would just equal x plus 4 squared. And you want to see where that comes from, just as a side note, essentially if we took x plus 4 squared, well, squaring means multiplying something times itself, so that means x plus 4 times x plus 4. If we FOIL this out, x times x squared, 4x and 4x, and then the last terms, plus 16. Combine your like terms in the middle. This turns into x squared plus 8x plus 16, which is what we started with. So the whole goal here is to figure out what we need to add onto the end. So we had to add that 16 to create the whole thing into a perfect square. And then we close off by actually writing it as that perfect square. So as the x plus 4 squared. So for this next one, look at it again. We have y squared minus 36y. We need to figure out what we need to add to that. So you take your negative 36, divide it by 2. In this case, 36 divided by 2 is 18, technically negative 18, and then you square it. And 18 squared is 324. So 324 is what we actually have to add to it to make it a perfect square. Now to write it as the perfect square trinomial, our variable was y. 36 was negative, so it's a minus. Again, use that middle number. 18 squared. So for this last one, they won't always work out to be perfect numbers. That's okay. So we have 3. Well, 3 divided by 2 is just 3 halves. We can't actually do that division. That's fine. And then when we square it, whenever you square a fraction, you square the top, square the bottom. So 3 squared is 9. 2 squared is 4. So we had to add 9/4 to make it a perfect square. And then in these parentheses, our 3 was positive, so it turns into y plus 3 halves squared.